Hola. Uh, hopefully, here we go. This is a recent photo of myself at home in Vancouver, riding bikes. I'll get rid of this thing. Hold on. What? Wow, this is very unprofessional. I apologize. Well, okay. This is crazy. Hopefully, you might have to deal with that little box down there. I don't know why it's there, but this is me riding bikes with my sister. And actually, I'm actually on a scooter. It's cut off, but it's a very uncool looking scooter. And that bike that she's riding was like the bike that I would do a lot of dangerous things on. And a lot of my childhood was spent inventing games or turning everything into a game. And one of the games I used to play was seeing how far I could ride my bike with my eyes closed. And I memorized the route a pretty far distance from our house, from my cul-de-sac. So where I'm standing is pretty much the driveway to my house, and out to the right is a road, and then you have to make a right, and the road bends, and then you have to make a left and a right. And I kind of memorized this path. So I never told my parents this, but often when I'd be coming home, I would close my eyes and see if I could make it all the way into my driveway with my eyes closed. And I would start further and further away, and I could get to where it was like a couple corners away, and I could like feel the road, I guess, was designed so that when it would, because it rains a lot in Vancouver, the roads are very like almost like a hill to the middle, so you could sort of tell where you were on the road based on like feeling where you were on the curve of the road. And I could make full turns with my eyes closed. And I remember one day doing it and riding for quite a while and making 2 turns and feeling like I had a good idea where I was. I was getting closer and I should be at my driveway, and I never felt the bump of like the ramp. And I opened my eyes and there was just like this big tire, and I drove right into the back of like my neighbor's Jeep, and it was the tire that was on the back of the Jeep. And I like fell off my bike, and I remember looking up, and he had like a bike rack on the back, and there was these 2 like really large spikes on either side of the tire, and my head had literally gone like right in between both of the bike rack spikes. And yeah, I never told my parents that, but I think I've just always been, I always sort of like pushed the limit of like, maybe not just safety, but trying to like make, I guess, life more exciting for myself, and make, I think things like this, speaking in public, they're all sort of like challenges where I don't necessarily find it easy, but I get excited by challenging myself. And I just zoomed in here to show like how bad my haircut is. It's hard to see there, but my mom cut this really weird shape on the front of my face. Yeah, so this is not sexual. My in-and-out problem is actually a something that happens to me whenever I go to the grocery store. I don't know if this is here in Portugal, but in Vancouver, the grocery stores have giant signs on the doors that say in-and-out. And so when I go to the store, I go in the indoor, and I do my shopping. And if I'm with my fiance, we get a bunch of stuff. And this always happens, and she sort of waits to watch it happen. But I always take all the groceries. And then on the other side of these doors, it also says in and out. So both sides of the indoor say in, and both sides of the outdoor say out. And for whatever reason, I always go in the indoor again, and it doesn't open, and I slam my face into the door. And because you're supposed to go out the outdoor. And I always get really annoyed at this, and I don't find anyone else in the world agrees with me. But I think that that's a really, it's an example of really bad design, because to me, it's like if it was a red and a green door, and there was a traffic light, you always go on green and you always stop on red. So like if I was to design the doors, green would always mean like go, or go through the door. and red would obviously mean like don't go to this door, like it won't open. But the fact that there's this weird like binary decision of like in and out, like you have to know whether you're coming in or out of the place to know which of the two doors to go into. So it's an overly complicated thing that for some reason, the way my brain is, I have a hard time distinguishing between the two. And I don't think I'm dyslexic, but it's just an odd way that my brain works, where I always have this weird issue with these doors. And it's like every time we go shopping, it happens to me. And I think so. I guess this talk, as you'll see, is like very random. It's like perhaps scary look into how my brain works. And all these things I feel like lead to how I ended up making a website that's been my job for 9 years now. And so sort of like, in a way, this next thing is like an internet version of that door problem. And it's like just a problem that I started to notice and would encounter over and over. And I used to work in street fashion, designing clothes, working for brands like Converse and a brand in New York called 316. And so my job was to make like primarily like graphic T-shirts. And I guess the way it worked is there's a website called Hypebeast. I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but it's like a very popular site that a lot of the fashion designers would go to and you know, read what the latest things that are coming out. And I guess like the way it worked at the time was we would be pulling inspiration from a variety of sources, trying to make like, you know, obscure references to things, or trying to figure out like what's cool, and then hope that that site posted us, and if it did, like product would like sell out and do really well. So at a certain point, I think people started to think like, why should we even waste time like trying to come up with an idea if all we're trying to do is get onto this website? Like, if we really want Hypebeast to post it, why don't we just make what Hypebeast posts? So this is what I would call the Hypebeast loop. It's like, and it's not just them, but it was the first time I encountered it, where designers no longer cared about like trying to dig up like an obscure reference or think of a new idea. It was like they could just save out all of the brand's clothing from the website and then just remake those graphics. And it was, yeah, so you'd see this very tighter and tighter loop of like every brand releasing the exact same clothing. And essentially it creates like an echo chamber. And this was like, I don't know, 10 years ago. So this is before all the like, I know like with the Trump election, they blame that a lot on like echo chambers and people being in these like bubbles where you're unaware of like how the rest, like other paradigms other than your own paradigm. So this is sort of like the first time I encountered it, and it slowly, like at the time was like Google like personalizes your search, or your Facebook feed is very tailored to like your friends who all have like the same music taste or all the same religious views or the same political views, and you start to become unaware of these other paradigms. And actually, I just noticed that like Weird Al Yankovic is like being trending in my, I don't know if what that says about my taste, but it's, and then Instagram with their Explore page. And eventually like I encounter this a lot with Netflix when I'm watching Netflix and I'm like, there's nothing on Netflix, and I get really upset. And I go to my friend's house who has different tastes than I do, and I see all these movies I didn't even know were on Netflix. And I started to realize that it's like, if I don't watch a horror movie like every day, like Netflix isn't going to suggest to me a horror movie, so I have no idea that they're even there. And when I want to watch one, it just doesn't display for me. And that's like very problematic, because not everyone's going to watch like the same kind of movies every day. Like, you want a variety. And I think we're living in what I would call in like the age of like, well, like human curation in the age of algorithms. So this is where I feel like I somehow live, is in this weird spot where I'm doing a job that all these algorithms, like computers, like robots, like these things are essentially in some ways doing better than I am, in terms of they'll consistently deliver you something that you already like way better and more efficiently and more like frequently than I can. And so it kind of makes me question every day, like, what's the point of me even doing my job if I'm trying to achieve this robotic, like competing with what a computer can do. And I think it's very problematic when you're a creative person trying to come up with new ideas, like going back to the Hypebeast thing, like going back to trying to come up with new ideas. There's sort of like no reward for that. The algorithms are really going to reward people that pander to their audience. And you see that a lot with Instagram, like people, like photographers get really trapped in one aesthetic. And many of my friends who are amazing photographers feel like they can only post one kind of photo because that's what gets the most likes, and that's what allows more people to see it. But what people are seeing is something that maybe they're not as excited about. So it like presents, I don't know, it's an interesting spot to be in when I'm curating work. I'm trying to think, how can I challenge people? But if you do it too much, it's seen as like inconsistent. Like if you went to a restaurant, you probably have a favorite restaurant where you always get this like favorite thing. Like maybe it's like the best pizza place or something like that. But if you like went to your pizza place one day and they're like, oh yeah, today we're gonna have like broccoli pizza or something. Actually, broccoli might be pretty good, but like something that's like, I don't know. And they're constantly experimenting to where like half the time you go, you don't really like the pizza or you're like indifferent. It kind of slowly goes lower on your list of like restaurants you just go to because you want to rely on like a good pizza. And it's the same thing with like movies. It's like movies are really expensive. So most people I know who want like a night out for entertainment, they'd rather see like a guaranteed like 7 out of 10 movie that like everybody's going to watch than risk seeing like a 0 out of 10 or 1 out of 10, but maybe see a 10 out of 10 or something new. And so this is really problematic trying to run a website where I'm trying to show new things and actually make it interesting for myself. So this is, in 2009, this is what my website looked like. And it actually started in 2008, but I couldn't find, like there's like a Wayback, I don't know if anyone uses Internet Wayback Machine, but it's like, it's pretty cool. You can like search websites and there's snapshots pretty frequently. So this is like, it was actually really crazy to go back and look at like the different stages of my site. And the links are actually clickable, and then like even like JavaScript and stuff works on this. It's not even my site, it's like this like archive of it. Anyways, so this is how it first started, and it was like a hobby just to really, because I was doing the street fashion stuff when I first started it, I was like, oh, I can still post some of my own work and post like my friends' work and just really make it a personal journal as a way of like people could maybe find my work and hire me to do something. And then the more I worked on it, the more bored I became of like writing about my own stuff. So it eventually quickly became just like finding more and more work and then emailing people. And I used to write roughly three personal emails a night, and I did that for like the first like 3 years. So that's like 3 times 3. It was like 3,000 personal emails I wrote. So if you want, like, sometimes I speak for journalism students, and their first question is like, how do I make a website and live off of it or get an audience? It's like, write 3,000 personal emails. Like, that's the easiest way. And it's not like spamming people. It was literally like, I really love your work. I'm not looking for anything from you. I just want more people to know about your work. And that, like, that's the end of the email. And it was such a simple thing to do. And it's not even hard work. It's just a lot of work. And I think a lot of this kind of stuff is just being willing to do something like that, like over and over. And I was excited because in 2008, like, there wasn't that many sites that were really like trying to do that. And I was definitely inspired by a handful of them, but I really felt like I was kind of like, almost like in like a rowboat or something, and there's like chains attached to these like treasure chests, you know, deep in the water, and I'm like, everyone's asleep in the boat, and I'm the only one who's awake, and I'm like pulling up these chests and trying to take like as much gold as I can, because I felt like the more that I would write about artists' work, the more audience the site would have, and it becomes like this ongoing archive. And I was lucky in that a lot of artists had really bad websites. So if you had like a decently searchable site, like if Google was liked your site, if I wrote about an artist, often that article would become more relevant to the artist's name than their own website, because a lot of artists were using these old Flash sites that like Google couldn't search properly. And so eventually, like, I think at its peak, Boom was doing like 4 million page views a month. And that was when I was running it by myself, living at my parents' house. And this is what it looks like now, and we're actually releasing a new site in the next month. So originally the name, I actually just picked it pretty randomly. Like it was based on this, like I had an idea for the logo, so it was like Boom with 7 O's fits perfectly into like a 3x3 square. And I tried to register like other amounts of O's after the fact, and then all of them were like taken pretty much. So it sort of just worked out. And then I was like, oh, it'll be, if we go back to this slide, it's like art, design, film, music, photo, junk, I like how like I carefully thought of like what each category would be, and then junk was like one of them. But it was supposed to be like each O was a different color, and then each of the colors on the site, whenever it was like a yellow post, it would be art, and so on. And then over time just sort of realized that nobody cared about that or noticed that that was anything. So it sort of like fell away. But and then like early on, I read this book. Miranda July is a filmmaker and an artist, and she had this project in the early 2000s called Learning to Love You More with Harold Fletcher. And so they released this book together of like the best. So they would put out all these calls for submissions, and the submissions were for like, one of them was like write out an argument you had. So I remember like people wrote this like really intense argument about a hamburger. This couple was like, the guy's like, I'm gonna eat my hamburger now, and then the girl's like, what, you never told me you were gonna like order hamburger, like why didn't you get me a hamburger? And he's like, I told you like 1,000 times I was gonna get a hamburger. And they have this like a very real, like you can imagine it being this like, this actually happened. And so people would write out these like really detailed arguments they'd had with people. And another project follow-up to it was like asking people to act out someone else's argument. So there was like, you could go on YouTube and search these things, and there'd be like a dad and like a son acting out this argument of possibly the hamburger argument or something that like doesn't fit their relationship. And it was just this really bizarre thing to encounter. And I remember the project that really sort of impacted me the most was like these like encouragement banners she would have people make. So it was literally just like make an encouragement banner and take a photo of it somewhere in public. And so people would like make these sayings and then photograph them like in the forest or like in their office or whatever. And I started to think like, like it was fun to write about people's work, but could I take it to like another level and actually get people to like make stuff? So I started with the simplest project I could come up with was like taking a photo of the sunset. And I think like, in my opinion, it was like, or my thinking behind it was like, it's really hard to take a bad photo of a sunset. So in this mix of photos here, there's like a guy who's the head photo editor of Transworld Surfing who happened to read the site. So that's his photo on like the mid right. It's a bit hard to see here, but there's other people here who are not even quote unquote photographers. They're just doing it for fun. But in a way, like you can't really differentiate like what is professional and amateur. And I started to really get excited by this idea of like mixing the two, and that's already what I was doing on the site, where I'd post like a professional painter's work next to like a student's work, and not like being disrespectful, but sort of like not, well, maybe disrespectful. I don't know. I didn't care whether someone was a good artist, like a cool artist or a respected artist, or completely unknown. It was just like whether I thought the work was interesting, and I think like. So while I was doing that, I had like Boom on Facebook and Twitter, and I was trying to like, what are other fun things I could do other than like the way you're supposed to use these things? So I used to post statuses on Boom's Facebook, and this one's like, let's make a giant sandwich. Like I'll start with a piece of bread, and you all get to put one ingredient in. And then, so I commented under this thing like bread, and then like all these people would like write an ingredient. So there's like butter, onion, salami, tomato, lettuce, and then someone wrote the greed of a private insurance company and like chicken tikka, and it goes on, and like in the end this girl wrote the laughter of a demonically possessed child amused at the sight of a wilted lettuce leaf. And so you can tell who are like the artists and who are, but and and there would be like hundreds of these comments, and I started to get excited by this idea of like, oh, there's enough people here where I could like do some fun things that, like what are some different ways that I could take advantage of all the people that, not take advantage of, but I mean like get to use this platform to do fun things. So this is a project called Little Drifters, and my idea was like to have people build these little boats. This is something that my sister and I used to do when we were camping, is like take leaves and branches and twigs and just build them into little boats, and they're all like natural elements, so it's not like littering, but and then just take a photo of the creation and then send it to me. And so yeah, people all over the world were sending these in, and then I hosted this big event in Vancouver where all these people came to this little lake, and then it was actually the first time where I did an event that wasn't an art show, and it was based on a project. And I remember feeling like really anxious driving to it because I wasn't sure if anyone would come. And it was because it's like you're asking people to do something that's very like naive and very like childlike. It's like just come to the park and build like a little boat, and there's no other real reason. And I remember when we drove up, I could see people like climbing through the bushes and like scavenging for materials, and it was like people my age, like young kids, like parents with those kids, and then like older people who didn't have kids. It was like the most variety of people all came and sat. We had like a picnic. We actually had a barbecue, but I found out after it was like illegal to have barbecues there. But the newspaper came out and actually took photos of it because it turned into like a big thing. And yeah, I started to get like really excited by this idea that like people would come to do these like really naive things, and also it was like I was giving them an excuse to do it. It's kind of like I would like equate it to like alcohol. Like people like to dance more after they've had alcohol, and I feel like it's a thing where you can always say, oh, like I looked really ridiculous, but it's because I was drunk, and that's sort of like everyone's like, oh, okay, that's allowed. Like you're allowed to look ridiculous as long as you're drunk. And I feel like a little bit is like if like a 40-year-old guy was in the park building a little boat and someone's like, why are you doing that? He could be like, oh, you know, this website told me to do it. It's not like I came here and I wanted to do this thing by myself or anything. And I think, yeah, it's sort of like just making it as easy as possible for people to get to do these things that I think secretly everybody wants to do. And this is like a moment, sort of like a milestone moment for me in the site was like, this guy emailed me from Armenia, and he's like, oh, I saw your Little Drifters project, and I took it upon myself to do it here with a bunch of kids. So this guy, like, he's like a Peace Corps worker, and so he sent me all these photos of these kids, like, doing the same project, floating it in this river, and, like, I had no idea, like, the project had sort of, like, reached that far. And, yeah, so it's just, like, I think, like, with all the success the site has, for me, the most meaningful ones are when people sort of, like, take the same approach that I'm taking and sort of run with it on their own. And so this is, like, a direct... kind of like after the Miranda July encouragement banner stuff, I just started experimenting with Twitter, and I just tweeted one day, like, who wants free encouragement? And all these people were, like, asking for it. So I picked the first person that asked for it, and I said to everyone on the Boom Twitter, I was like, everyone encourage, like, if it was Chris, I was like, everyone encourage Chris for the next hour, and if you tweet Boom in it, I'll like retweet it so everyone can see. And I think well, like tons and tons of people started doing it, and it sort of broke a rule of Twitter, I guess, in terms of like I was flooding like people's feeds with like every 30 seconds I was retweeting another tweet, and there are all these messages to someone that most people have no idea who it is. So you would think it would be very annoying, and a lot of people would like unfollow that because it's like just nonstop all afternoon. But it ended up being where like all these new followers showed up. And then a month later, I tried it again where I asked who wants free encouragement. And then I tried to answer every single person rather than choosing one, like myself. And if it was like, I'd click on their profile. If they had a website, I'd go to the website. If they made films, I'd watch a film, and I'd be like, hey, like Tom, your movie about the dog was like really funny. And then something really specific to show that I took this time to go like even a step further. And I ended up spending like 5 hours just like on Twitter, and it was the same thing, like all like nonstop, just tweeting to people. And all these magazines started like writing like, if you want free encouragement, like Booooooom on Twitter is like doing this thing. So like hundreds of these people were like following and then like requesting encouragement. And I realized that like this is sort of like I don't know, like, there's so much potential to do a project around it. So I started before that I did a project or around the same time where people could just email encouragement to this like encouragement email address, and then I would just lay them out in Photoshop. And so this message is like posted anonymously on the site, so it just says like, I like your braces, and you don't know who sent it and you don't know who it's to. And I would post all these messages, like specific messages to someone in particular, but you don't know what the situation is. And people would email me saying they were like crying, like these messages would like make them cry and stuff. Like they got really emotional reading them. And I think like it started to like, I really started to understand that like this is like the most interesting part or aspect of the website to me was like having people reveal these very personal things. And it's opposite to what I was talking about before in terms of like this really broad, appealing content that like gets, it's just, you're just doing it to please other people, to get more likes, to get more whatever. But ironically, like this stuff went really viral, even though my focus was trying to do something that was like, regardless of that stuff, not trying to make something go viral. It was like, I just want to make something that speaks to people and really appeals to the people that are the core audience who like are the ones taking parts in these projects. And then I guess like once I did that, that sort of like the authenticity or like you could tell that I cared about it, or I hope that they could care, or you could tell that I cared. And so it sort of became this thing where I was like, oh, that's actually a great recipe for doing these things is like, well, this project was for Spike Jonze's blog. Spike Jonze is a film director, and he had a website called We Love You So. And so they contacted me to do this project for Where the Wild Things Are. And this was the sort of like first big like project that was kind of sponsored, like it was like about this film. And their idea, or the thing that we came up with, was like building forts, because multiple times in the film, Max builds forts. And so people, yeah, it was similar to the Little Drifters thing. It was like, just build a fort and take a photo of it or a video. And so people like would go into the woods and build these things, or be in their living room. And I just started getting all these fort submissions, and it just took over the internet. Like it was like, I think it helped because it was related to Where the Wild Things Are, and it was on Spike Jonze's website. But all these new people started to become interested in these projects. And I think like before that, I used to think of like the quote unquote main part of the site being this like polished, highly curated work, and then the project side being this sort of like unpolished, raw, uncurated, because if you submit to a project, I don't filter it, like it goes up if you submitted to it. And that used to be sort of like secondary, but then I started to feel like this is actually more the part that I care the most about. And yeah, this kid on the right built like a 3-level wood fort. Like we had like a few prizes, so he won the prizes. He took it to literally another level. So this project, in the same vein, was for Converse skateboarding. So all these brands started to like want projects to say, they're just like, we don't know what it would be, but like, can you make something for us? And this one's obviously not that big of a jump, because it's literally just making skateboards out of like random things, and one's made of ice, and one's a banana, and one's made of cardboard, and there's like beans and egg, like breakfast food. And yeah, and so I started to sort of like keep making these projects where they had the same sort of like, the spirit was very naive and genuine. I just thought it was fun. and then these brands really wanted to be aligned with it because it was like pure, like they saw as like this pure creative community. The guy in the bottom left actually submitted a video. It's like a guy in a business suit, and he like had this whole movie about how like the stock market crashes, and he closes his laptop and there's like trucks and wheels on it, and he skates down the street on his laptop. And actually, I have a little video of, not that one, but maybe this is not going to work. Is one of the submissions was I don't know if there's sound, if the sound guys can turn it on. It's not a big deal, but it's just music. So these people in Vancouver made these like planters, and they shot this little video of them like skateboarding in Vancouver on these like planters. And yeah, I just really enjoyed like how far people were taking these things, and like hundreds of submissions would come into these things. And I don't even think I asked for people to submit videos, but these were like just, I don't know, something about it really is sort of like the essence of my website somehow. And that there's all these people that I feel like kind of have a similar weird brain, or like are interested in similar things. Like if I meet someone who says they know about the website, I instantly feel like, oh, we probably could talk for like 2 hours because, you know, I know that we share a lot of interests. And I think there's a funny clip at the end where she like bails. Yeah, so the project started to be like this. This project started to be like this thing where this is actually one that I did with Chris. So we met a while ago, and we did a project with MTV and Sony at the time. So it was another sort of like branded project, and it's very similar where we had people like, I'll back up a couple, but they're like building instruments, and our idea was that like they could be like actually functioning musical instruments, or they could just be like sculptural. So if they're functioning, a lot of people actually submitted videos of themselves like playing on these instruments. But there's like a violin that's like knitted that obviously like doesn't make sound, but some people like more like kind of electronic, like nerdy inventor guys like made ones where like they would hook like circuit things up to like plants, and then you could like touch the leaves of a plant and play like electronic music, and people like went like nuts. And then so I kind of like always come back to the encouragement one. I keep trying to make other versions of it. So I was going to Hawaii for an arts festival, so I thought I could do like a different version of it there. So before I left, like I was trying to think of a way I could bring like my audience from all over the world with me to the festival, because 99% of them wouldn't actually be there. And so I just said, like, anyone who wants like a postcard sent to them from this festival, like just needs to be willing to like ask for encouragement for a specific thing. And actually they also had to be willing to put their mailing address in it. So it was like, it was a lot to ask of people, but like hundreds of people wrote these like really, detailed messages about like something tough they're going through, and a mailing address. And then this is an artist on the right name, Apex. Not everyone that I approached was like a famous artist. I was just meeting random people in Hawaii, and I was like, hey, I'm doing this thing. Do you have like 2 minutes to write an encouraging message to someone you don't know, like somewhere else in the world? And I don't think I ever got denied. Like most people were like, oh yeah, I'd love to. And so I'd read out this message, and then it was funny because sometimes like there'd be like a 14-year-old like boy, and like the message I'd read out is like this really complicated like romantic problem this like girl's having in like Switzerland or something, and so he's writing this advice to her. And so I took photos of everyone that would like write a message, and it was cool because other people would write their Twitter or like some type of social media on the postcard. So I would also see like a couple weeks after the festival all these responses back like, thank you so much for the postcard. Like I could see conversations between these people. And this is I don't know. There's another famous artist, No Hope, from Israel. And it's just sort of like taking that idea further. And then one of the biggest projects we did was like sponsored by Adobe. And the idea was to like remake master works of art as photos. And there was tons of amazing submissions for it. So this project went, yeah, like spread all over the internet. And actually, a book publisher contacted me to start putting together a book of them. And it ended up being like an insanely expensive book because like to get the rights to publish a lot of these like really well-known works was a lot more expensive than I thought. So it was a book that normally I probably could have done just illegally on my own, but it was awesome to work with a publisher because there could be like 8,000 books like in the first edition, and they're paying for the rights for them. And so it was cool to like do a project where it became, oh, I don't have my last slide, but it became a book. And shoot. Here's the book. And I was really proud of this. Like, I love this guy's submission, and I just love like the orange that's like under, or the grapefruit that's under his arm. And I battled so hard for this to be the cover. Like, they're like, we don't want to put this on the cover. Or they weren't like saying we don't want it, but they're like, what other options do you have? They're saying it very politely. And I was like, if you guys are worried about it selling, like, this is gonna, like, I just tried to turn around, like, this is actually the selling point of the book. Like, whoever wants this book, this image is gonna appeal to them the most. Like, they'll want this book. And I don't think anything I said really made sense, but they made that the cover, and like my name is right across like his butt cheek, which is like amazing. And yeah, anyway, so this is sort of the end. I think I'm like kind of close to the end of time, but this is like a thing that I drew, a very bad drawing, and this is like this is a river with a bunch of rocks across it, and this is a person. And this is sort of like how I view curation. And if this is you or me or someone who's a visitor of the site or just looking at something in general, and this person way ahead of them, like on this other end, I view as like, this is sort of my experience in like elite art places like galleries or museums. They're often talking about things on this level of like, I just don't understand anything they're saying. And I went to art school, I graduated art school. I still feel uncomfortable in a lot of art spaces because I feel like what I'm saying is stupid. I don't really get what's happening. And there's no, I shouldn't, this is a very blanket statement, but I feel like the feeling I get is that they don't really try too hard to speak in terms that are like below them, or someone who hasn't taken the time to do the studying. And it's, so there's a sort of gap between like where I am and what they're talking about, and I have no idea like how to get there. The sort of other version of that is like you and the thing you're looking at, or the thing you're enjoying, the thing you're consuming, the entertainment, if this is like going to see like a Transformers movie, or if this is like reading a BuzzFeed article, or this is whatever, it's like being on the same rock. And this to me is like the internet today, is like Instagram. When I look at Instagram Explore feed, it's like I'm like chilling on the same rock. And it's not fun. Like it's fun, it's okay, but we're not going anywhere. Like it's like we're just patting each other on the back or hearing our own voice and liking more of the same stuff. And I feel like, I guess this is sort of like one way to look at what I'm trying to do is figure out how to sort of present a variety of work that where the people can feel like I'm only on like maybe one rock away from them, and they can understand the jump between a broad Transformers kind of movie or that kind of content and something with a little bit more creative thought in it or some interesting ideas. And to sort of like just keep moving one rock and building up a trust there that the person's like, I'm always gonna lead to the next thing, so they can kind of get like, so if I did go a couple rocks ahead though, they would still feel like, you know, there's a bit of trust there. And yeah, I don't know, maybe that's making no sense to anyone. I kind of like put together, but that's sort of like, I guess in a way what I'm trying to do with the site, and sort of the only reason I can come up with for like being a human being trying to do like what algorithms do. So yeah, that's it. Oh, obrigado.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
Do I just ask? Does anyone have any questions? You have 5 seconds. No, I'm just joking. Does anyone have any questions? I would welcome any questions. Yeah.
Really? Oh gosh. I have to listen to my voice now. It's awful. So you're saying that you're just interested to show different different things and different works and just send 1,000 emails. Yeah. But how did you find them? Because I had a platform that was Stumble. Do you know?
Tumblr?
No, Stumble.
Oh, Stumble, yeah.
Yeah, and I was addicted for a very long time. But then it was just so much information every day and every click that I just started to feel that I knew a lot, but didn't know nothing, you know? Yeah. So how do you select some artist or some project in the very beginning? And, well, this is cool, and I will ask for more information. How do you do that?
Well, I think what's interesting is, like, back when I was working in, like, street fashion, even before when I was working it, when I was just, like, kind of, like, into clothes or sneakers or whatever, you used to have to work really hard to find stuff. Like, it was like you had to go to, like, New York or Japan and go to this one store and, like, buy it in person or line up. And so to find the thing was, like, this direction of, like, trying to, like, grab things almost. And I feel like now it's the opposite. We're like, I'm almost like putting my hands up and like saying like, no, like, and things are like, you only allow certain things in. And I really feel like there's gonna be sort of like a rejection culture where I feel like it'll almost be like, oh, you still use Instagram? Like, why? And creative people will be sort of like the first to sort of just like let those things go. And it'll be like, not like a status thing, but I think there will be sort of like an attitude of like, you can't continue being a creative person and like using these things the way they are. And I had a teacher at film, like when I studied film at art school, he'd never seen like E.T. And it was crazy, but I was like, wow, I respect it. It was like, I guess like it's borderline just like like choosing ignorance was just stupid, but I think something about it was interesting where like to actively, I'm not saying he just tried to not watch the movie, but I think there's something interesting about like really trying to be careful about how much stuff you like let in or at what points when you're ready for lots of inspiration. Because this is like really bad marketing to be like, don't go to my website, but I honestly think like it will be detrimental if all you do is spend all day on my website and never make anything. And I think that that's why I'm really interested in the projects, because it sort of balances out looking at a lot of stuff. It's like to provide people with visual inspiration, but then also be running monthly projects where it's like, now that you're all fired up to make something, here's an easy thing to do that will be fun to like make. And I feel like this is a very roundabout way of answering your question, but I feel like if you're concentrating on both those things, where like at some points you're like wanting inspiration and maybe not even wanting to like learn every detail about every artist, but just see stuff, and then switch gears to like making stuff, I think it's helpful to like during those periods not to be looking at stuff. And if there's any sort of positive to come from like the bubbles, the cultural bubbles, like that are what I was saying are largely really negative because you're unaware of these other ways of thinking. Like people that voted for Trump had no idea about Hillary. Like you're like unaware of these other views. I do think it's interesting that there'll be all this like, you know, Republican art that's being made that I'm not seeing because all my social networks, you know, it's silent in there. And it's an interesting thing that's like swinging the other way of like, I think we took like multiculturalism for granted, and right now we're in this weird time of like a lot of borders closing down and countries acting a lot more insular. And I'm not saying any part of that's good, but if there was some sort of like silver lining on it, is like maybe the idea that like not all movies reference the same movies for a while or something, you know, like I'm not hyper aware of like what everyone's doing in Japan and Mexico and Portugal, you know, and Vancouver. And I think out of that, like there'll be more surprising work. Like try to think of the last time you watched a movie where you're like, oh my God, I've never seen anything like that. Like for me, that was Under the Skin. It was a movie that like I watched it in theaters and I didn't even really like it, but yeah, and I thought about it more than any other movie that entire year. I don't know if many people seen it, but it's like largely done with like hidden cameras. So a lot of the people in most of the film are non-actors, and then I won't give away anything, but it was a super important thing for me to see because it was so different than, I was amazed that it came to theaters. And it's like a director who's like music videos like I loved, and it was so exciting that a movie like that could get made and then brought to like pretty mainstream audience. But it was like, you know, there was a million other more popular, bigger, exciting movies to watch. And luckily I was with a couple people who were down to like take a risk on something they knew nothing about, and they hated it. So I don't know if like I'll ever get to go with them again, but I just felt like it was such an important thing, and I don't know. Maybe that doesn't, I think I went away from your question, but yeah. Is there any other question, or any follow-up, or?
I think I have a question. Hey? Oh, okay. It's weird to listen to my voice in speakers. Okay, hi, my name is Eduardo. I do have a music blog, a very small music blog. And I was listening to your presentation and I was feeling like, man, I really am trapped in the internet. Nobody gives a damn about what I write. And that's what I feel sometimes. And I think that your posture always was to run away from that trap of indifference in the internet. But at the same time, did you ever felt trapped in the internet when you started Boom? When you started Boom, did you felt trapped in that challenge? And if you did, what did you do to run away from it?
I mean, that's a good question. I think like this is another. I'm only going to answer people's questions, I guess, in a very roundabout way, and I won't even promise that I ever make it back to the answer. But one thing I've talked about in previous talks about like sort of how to make your own website, or like the things I did. Like to me, it's like a spectrum, like any topic. Like I use the example of basketball. If I was to write like make a website about basketball, it's a very broad topic, and perhaps there's like, I don't know, a quarter of the room that cares about basketball, so I have like an audience. The downside is like it'll be very difficult to get to the first like 300 pages of Google search results if I write an article about basketball. So the other end of that is to go to a very niche extreme where it's like I'm only going to make a website about like cool jerseys from the 70s basketball era, and it's only about that thing. And maybe 3 people in this room care about that, so I hit like a limit of how many people will ever care about it. But I do have a better chance of becoming the #1 cool 70s basketball jerseys, you know, website. And so my advice is, if you're like somewhere on that spectrum, to like move a little bit in from either extreme. So it could be like vintage jerseys, or, you know, high school basketball, or something that somehow moves a little bit in from the end, even if you eventually want to move back out. So I don't know how obscure your blog, the music is that you write about, but maybe there's a way to make it a little bit, appeal to a little bit more people, like, and then as you build up a bit more of an audience, to then be like keep mentioning this like weirder interest that you might have, or like more obscure artists that are harder to like appreciate at first. And I think BuzzFeed is the biggest example of that. Like BuzzFeed made a whole empire off of like stealing, reblogging content, making these really stupid, inane lists. But now they can also hire amazing journalists and write like tributes to 9/11, and people will read them and not even care that it's on BuzzFeed. So that's an extreme example of going extremely broad and then turning around and being like, oh yeah, but we also have intelligent content too. And I'm not saying you have to go to the extreme, but one way is to sort of like figure out what would be the one step bigger version or more broad appeal to what I'm doing, and tap into like several hundred more people that might care about that. and knowing that you want to guide those people or a lot of those people back to like this more obscure thing. And also like making friends with other people that are doing similar things. So early on, I would just email anyone that I found that was running their own website. I actually was very a frequent commenter on all these like middle-aged women's art, like craft sites. So they were like making like doily art. I don't know if you have doilies in Portugal, but they're like little. Anyways, it's just like little craft things that are not really like my audience, but what I was really interested in was like how active the comments were. They would have like a fraction of the traffic that I would have, but they would have 50 comments on like, I don't know, like a little knit sweater or something. And like they'd come back and I realized people were just like chatting to one another. And I started commenting a lot, and then I actually did collaborations with them. So I one of the free encouragement projects actually, with this website called Design for Mankind, we took what people wrote, like the I like braces and those kind of things. We opened it up to any artists and designers to like take those and then make them into postcards. And then we actually produced sets of these postcards, and it was like a completely different audience, and it was a way smaller audience, but it was a way to like start working with these other people who were also sort of like fighting to like have a voice in the huge landscape of like blogs. And the more that you're sort of like all friends with these people, like it was really easy to be like, hey, I'm doing this other art project where people build little boats out of twigs and leaves, and then they would write about it. And I feel like, so like make friends with other people that are also sort of doing the same things as you, collaborate with one another, and you know, help them when they're trying to run a festival, talk about it, so that like, you know, when you're doing an interview with someone that you think is a big deal, you could be like, hey, do you mind like telling your audience about this interview that I'm excited about or something? And I think it's like, if you go the route of like personal relationship, you got to be like genuine about it, because people, it'll work against you. It's like if you're an asshole and you have Twitter, like more people will hate you. You might as well not have it. But if like you're a likable person, it like amplifies your personality. So I think like if you're a social person and people like you, like use those things, because it just helps more people be able to engage with you. And if you're not good at it, maybe don't do it. But I think like, yeah, I think there's a way to like not use people. It's like the way that I wrote those emails wasn't like, hey, can you tell all of your friends about my website? I didn't mention it in it. I literally put the link in there and was like, this is just for you. Like, I just like your work. And if they said thank you, I'd be like, if you have other friends that make work, send them to me, because I'd love to write about people that I don't know about. And I never turned it into like, hey, can you just blast this out to like everybody you know? Because that has a completely different tone to it. And so if you're writing something, I think keep that in mind. It's like everybody gets asked to do things for other people. But if your email is like an offering to that person, it's like, I just did this because like I like you. That's it. So that's my answer. That's good, I think.
Do we need to, because I can do it from here.
No, we can switch.
That's fine. That's fine. Jeff, I think you answered that question in 5 beautiful ways through. So Jeff and I met 5 years ago, and it's very a beautiful coincidence that we're now sitting on the stage here today. Every time I hear you speak, you constantly remind me that the human element is the most interesting part of the internet. And I feel like so much of our world now is dominated by apps and data and Facebook and Instagram. But through everything that you just shared, the human element of, you know, your just intuitive creativity and how you think of the people that you write about and the projects that you work on, and even the answer that you just gave, it reminds us that this is all just about human beings just trying to connect. And so with that, I want to thank the 180 Creative Camp team, the beautiful city, I'm going to like butcher the pronunciation of Abrantes, and all of you guys for enabling us to come together today. Over the past day, I've immediately been reminded of why it's so important for us to come together. There's so many ways in which we can all feel alone with our music blogs or our video projects, and to come together and be with other people that see the same world and have similar aspirations is absolutely invaluable. So with that, I'm going to awkwardly stumble to find my presentation. Which one? Find it. Cool. Oh no, shit. Okay. So, hello, my name is Chris Unwin. And I remember a time where we didn't introduce ourselves with @handles in front of our names. I am a 34, soon-to-be 35-year-old man, or boy, I don't know. And I am the product of the early internet. I don't know about everyone else in the crowd, but I remember a time where getting to the internet involved awkward dial-up connection boxes like this. If you were going to download a file, I don't know, you definitely can't see what this says, but for a 180 meg file, the estimated time is 39 years to download. So it's interesting as someone that, you know, from my personal experience, the internet kind of has like been slowly washing over my life as I've been coming of age. And, you know, it's important at these times to take stock of, you know, what this means for our lives and what potential is out there. I mean, the fact that Jeff and I connected through, you know, both the internet and shared friends 5 years ago and sit on a stage in Portugal 5 years later is proof that like literally anything is possible now. But it didn't seem that way when I was, you know, in my early 20s and coming out of high school, and people would ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? In many ways, my answer was like probably somewhere halfway between like an insecure artist and someone that still felt like they needed to be quote unquote successful. And so I interpreted that in my mind I wanted to work in media, and there were very few options for what that meant. And so for me, it was like I wanted to work at MTV. That was the cool media company. That would be like quote unquote making it as a creative media professional. And you know, through a series of random kind of like trips and stumbles in life, I found myself on the marketing team in launching MTV in Canada. So I thought that I had made it. I had wanted my MTV throughout my whole life, and I didn't have the choice for it. But when I got there, this is what it was. I got my MTV, but it wasn't my kind of situation. So much of what, you know, as Jeff alluded to, that most of media culture at that time was broadcast. So it was one signal that reached many. And so it needed to kind of cater to everyone's tastes. And in that, I think in many instances, there was a fall from grace from a media channel that was born out of experimentation and music videos and, you know, really organic relationships and collaboration with musicians that degraded into reality television and, you know, swearing and fistfights at Jersey Shore. So meanwhile, while I was working at a media company, I felt like a giant hypocrite because I didn't have cable for like the 8 years that I worked there, and I wasn't really watching any of the shows. Meanwhile, something was happening around me and around all of us where through blog culture, Twitter, these types of platforms were starting to uncover that there were real people out there that had real passions that existed beyond like the kind of one mainstream broadcast that was being sent to everyone. So here pictured is a guy like Jeff Staple, a shoe designer from New York. All of a sudden, I was aware of people like him that existed out there. And by being able to follow internet culture, I was able to discover real people, these niche interests that Jeff alluded to, that it used to be that you would have to go to Lower East Side in New York to like uncover the Jeff Staples of the world, or the shoe. This was, you know, the first like real like sneaker collaboration that drove a lot of like ferocious appetite around sneaker culture. So if you wanted to know about these things, you needed to either uncover it in real life, or you could start to find it through these social channels that were emerging on the web. Along with that, without relying on traditional TV broadcasters, there was new visual language to the internet where individual people were adding new ways of presenting photography, video, and the like. And I think the most important thing, there was no, you know, gatekeepers. There was no senior executive at MTV that was saying whether something made the grade or not. And so it created the conditions for this just kind of like rampant experimentation. And audiences could just kind of like flow on pipelines and discover the Jeff Hamadas of the world just because he was putting interesting shit out there. So what was driving this cultural shift? What we now understand is that this has been the rise of creator culture. And it's so funny that we have no sense of time in our technology and media that we don't realize how fast things are actually moving. So if you look at the platforms that have supported this, 2003 is when WordPress came out. So within the past 15 years, you know, personal digital publishing has presented itself. Facebook emerged in 2004, YouTube in 2005, so 12 years ago, Twitter in 2006, Spotify in 2008, Instagram in 2010, Medium in 2012, Snapchat in 2012 as well. So these all represent kind of global technology platforms that are becoming the de facto source of a certain type of media. And with that, the common thread amongst all of them is that they invite us. It's not one broadcaster speaking to you, it's encouraging you to be a part of that conversation. What's worthwhile to note is like, how do we actually respond to it? Yes, we can type, but also if we look at the Canon 5D came out just around 2005, which was a watershed moment in people's ability to produce HD video, high quality video, at a reasonable price. That was like the first kind of consumer grade DSLR. GoPro shortly thereafter, and the iPhone was, I think, like 2006. So, yeah, the iPhone actually turned 10 years ago, 10 years old, I think like 2 days ago. So it's insane to think, you know, not only how far we've come in a short period of time, but when we take stock at like what does the next 10, 20, 30 years of media and culture mean, we can only kind of assess from this that culture will come from us. Increasingly, media companies are going to be asking how they can serve our creativity, rather than forcing us to watch the situation pick up girls in Jersey Shore. Although I'm sure there'll be web series remakes. So now this idea that we're all creators, what does that mean? You can share your lens on life in photos. Instagram encouraged and asked people to participate, and now in a certain sense we are all photographers, or we are all people who share stories via photos in a way that didn't exist several years ago. You can share your vantage on the world with videos. Increasingly, you know, the ability to edit and share video, and for whether it's you know, vloggers that are sharing the story of their life, or filmmakers, there's, you know, a whole bastion of audiences waiting to hear from you, and the technical skill of everyday video creation has increased dramatically, in such a way that, you know, you don't need to be studying video production to be engaged in this. The hobbyist culture around video content creation is already massive. And I think that, like, ultimately what connects all of this, like whether your interest is in fashion and sneaker culture, or in architecture or obscure music, it's an outlet for interests connected by community and the people that share those interests. And a canvas stretched around the world. Whenever I'm in conversation with Jeff, he reminds me of the fact that the internet is like the best canvas for art. So how can we tap into creator culture to craft the lives that we want? I firmly believe that the shift that has happened in our ability to tell our own stories is an opportunity for us to truly shape the face of our lives. And with that, I think what's equally important is the world that we want to live in. I know, Jeff, you alluded to, kind of internet bubbles around sentiment. The things that, and that has to do with the things that we share and the bubbles that we exist in. But we also have the opportunity to burst bubbles with the ideas that we share. And not just in the form of, sad political commentary, but in creating provocative works of art that help people rethink their relationship to the world in which they live in. And we live in an age of ISIS, where there's these like intangible groups that represent darkness. And what I hope comes from these types of discussions is that we can collectively, be the ISIS of good and light and creativity. Probably deserves a rebrand, though. I wouldn't call it that. So I left my job at MTV. I said no to the situation and went out freelance, looking to instigate projects with people and around ideas that were of interest to me. Kind of like, rather than complaining about nothing being on TV, I took it upon myself to start creating things that I could be proud of. And it's funny, one of the first projects when I left MTV was working with Jeff. And it's so cool, and it's such a reminder of like why we're here over the course of this week. I had followed Boom for a significant period of time. It was like this kind of like really exciting, holy idea to me, and like your name was just like this like strange shroud, Jeff Hamada. And sure enough, just looked, I can't remember, one way or another, realized that we had a shared friend, Kyle. I reached out to him and said, I see that you know Jeff, could you introduce us? And he sent an email, and one thing led to another, and we ended up developing a project called Made of Imagination. When I worked at MTV, I worked in a bunch of different departments, ending up in a strategy role, but I never worked with the production team. On that project, Jeff showed the community-based project component. My kind of end of the deal was to produce a music performance series where bands would create instruments made out of found materials and then perform them in these kind of Blogatech-style music performances. And I didn't come from a video production background, but I went into this project about creativity just like ready to like take it on full force, and it was fucking scary. Because not only did we have a corporate partner involved and MTV involved, but most importantly, here was this guy that I really looked up to on the internet that I'd reached out to, and I felt like this real obligation to make something dope that like would actually meet the kind of like guidelines or the high bar that Boom had set. And what I came to realize is like, you don't need to know about something, but if you care a lot about it, you'll learn about it and you'll figure it out. And that was like such a meta project because it was about the creative process. And it ended up, I realized that, oh shit, you can create projects with new friends and learn along the way. And not only learn about what it takes to make a video, but also that freelancer life in understanding like the freedom that it can provide, but also like how scary and alone it can feel. And whether you're working alone or at a cafe, whether you don't know how taxes work or all of these types of things, I felt this kind of like huge lesson about freelance life. And so as the project started to pick up in pace, and we were doing kind of like 2 different series at a time, and I would be trying to develop the next one, I took on a studio space and kind of realized that this wasn't going to be about just me making projects with people like Jeff, but that I wanted to, in the process of learning and building a company, I wanted to help other people that had the same ambitions and aspirations. So yeah, I asked myself, how can we help others along the way? And so with that, what the company was initially called Free Agency, it's now called Free, and our primary mandate is to set the creators free. So what we do is we enable creators and companies to create, learn, and grow together. There's 3 components to Free as a company. One is Free Space, which is based in Toronto, in the creative core of Toronto. So it's a cultural incubator and social workspace. And you can see this is the space. Normally there's people in there. That's it empty. And we host different types of cultural gatherings. This was like a dinner where rather than just having tons of people talking at the same time, we would pose an issue and everyone would kind of like dig in and share their part of the story. We have a production space that is a kind of resource for the photography and filmmaking community in the city. We have a gallery space where we host different types of exhibitions. And this is Atiba Jefferson, super prominent skate photography legend. But then we'll also do photo shows that may be local photographers within the city or collectives within the city. And always putting these guys on the same stage with the people that are on the come up. Because Atiba was once a 19-year-old hustling photographer that was looking up to someone else. The next component is free agency, and so that's producing creator-powered content for brands. And we think that, in a certain sense, that it's the agency division. But what we're trying to do is kind of kill the creative agency. Then maybe not kill, but I got to be a little diplomatic here. I'm representing Canada, but enable a more direct connection between the creatives that have brilliant ideas and help companies understand that letting Jeff choose what was on the front page of his book is the right idea. Because the whole reason that publisher came to you in the first place is because you had created the project, amassed an audience, proven concept. And so really what we try to do in those corporate partnerships is help brands understand how to empower creators and therefore win in the process. So we've done, we used to run MTV's fashion vertical, and that was with Clean and Clear. I don't know if you guys have that here. It's an acne product. We've produced a film with Red Bull. We've done strange web series with musicians and Fords. Social photography for shoe brands. But basically helping create an effective creative relationship between companies and creators. And then an emergent side of the company is Free Studio, where we're partnering with creators that, through our relationships, in developing longer form films and series. So this isn't necessarily instigated by the brand, although brands may end up being involved, but this is focusing on incubating creative relationships that come from the studio space. So we just finished our first full-length documentary that we're going to be looking for a home for, called A Kid from Somewhere. And it features 3 people that we kind of, first off, I should start with the filmmakers. We had done a project that kind of like got a Nowness feature, a Vimeo staff pick. It kind of like bubbled up online. We really liked working with the directors, and so we got the studio behind developing this film that features the stories of 3 artists that we've kind of met through the community. L.A. Timpa, who is a local Toronto musician. Pat O'Rourke, who is the kind of guy that has like Chilligan's Island on Instagram. He has 60,000 followers, but like still works at a sneaker shop. So just like tapping into this like strange phenomenon where people have social currency, but like are still struggling to pay the bills. And Olivia B., who's a photographer who was discovered on Flickr in a land before Instagram, and is now like 21, 22, shooting for Vogue and like all these crazy brands. But someone that had to grow up really quickly because of a really quick success through her photography online. So as we were producing all these projects in the first couple years of with the free agency side of the business, something was happening. Everything was changing. I'll point to some examples. I would have friends that were, you know, people that started shooting social photography on a series with Ford that they were shooting on like an iPhone 3 or 4, and we were licensing the images to Ford, that didn't want to call herself a photographer. In that time, you know, a couple months later, she bought a Canon camera, and 6 months later, she was shooting for Nike, but she still didn't want to call herself a photographer. Conversations with like Jeff, like, I don't know what the hell to call you. Like, at some point, people have probably in earlier days referred to you as a blogger. I don't think that you're a blogger. Well, you run a blog. But there's this notion of like creator culture was forming. And I was also starting to see that as Instagram was popularizing, there was like projects that were getting green lit that like years ago would never have gone anywhere. Like so many artists would be like looking for funding in all the wrong places, and it just wouldn't be happening. And also what was happening is that, you know, I was personally like starting to follow like a creative director in Paris or like Jeff Staple in New York, and starting to see that what was actually possible in creator culture and how that was existing in different cities. And so with that, we launched the creator class. And I actually have a quick video just to show you a little bit of what it looks like, what the channel looks like. Yeah. This is totally gonna work.
But yeah, that's pretty much it. This is kind of where the magic happens.
So that shows you from our YouTube channel. Those are all from various projects that have that we've worked on. So what the hell is a creator class? When we first launched it, it started as an Instagram channel, a YouTube channel, and a really crappy .com. And I think one of the most interesting elements of it 3 years ago was the notion of like a hashtag was like a new thing. So we at the core wanted to document what was happening in creator culture. We knew there was way too much happening for us to try to do it as like 1, 3, 5, 7, 8 people. And so we wanted to have a really collaborative premise from the onset. And part of that with our Instagram strategy was not just to be a curation account, but to be working with the tight community within our team to produce dope shit that looked really cool, and then start to curate other stuff that we felt like was kind of like of that same vibe. And you know, now we live in a world where there's like hashtag clouds and like all of these ways in which people are, and I don't even know if people use hashtags anymore, I don't know. But at that time, the notion of an entity saying, we want you to be a part of this, was a really fresh idea on Instagram. And so that, I think, was like one early instance of like where we saw success around documenting creator culture. Now that we're 2.5 years into it, we're thinking about how can we go further and further and further with this. And so, yes, the creator class is now a .com that we're continuing to develop it as a platform for showcasing the community's work. It's a YouTube channel, Vimeo channel, and Instagram. But where it's headed is evolving into a development program. And you know, taking the notion of community and building a structure around community, taking this cultural movement around creator culture, and helping people at all stages of you know, their journey as a visual storyteller, to develop and advance in their craft. The three kind of like big bucket things that we try to do is inspire people around the stories of others in the community that are making moves, inform people, and that may be technical skill, but increasingly I'm realizing there's like a lot of technical information on the internet, and it's more about how we can interpret our lives and make use of those technical skills. And then connecting people, and you know, the vibe that we feel in this camp is like, I think something that's shared amongst all of us, and that we're trying to do as much as possible, and also evidenced in Jeff's presentation, is like bringing human beings together and seeing what magic comes from it. So what happens when we take a generation of visual storytellers that grew up with the emergence of those platforms, and entrepreneurs that realize that they don't need to just work for some other company, and they can have their own kind of like their path as a creative, and do these three things with them. So this has been how we kind of generally think of how we organize the community, our members. They definitely span interests, geographies, and skill levels, and it's been kind of informal in the way in which we, you know, generally relate to community that comes out to events and stuff of that nature. Starting to segment professional people that have started to be able to get paid out of their craft, and then engaging leaders from the community who have made it. And as the Creator Class as a development program starts to advance over the next year, this is going to become kind of like more explicit into the structure of the community. So you can kind of officially join the community and attend events, hopefully coming to a city near you. As people professionalize, we're going to have kind of more advanced services for and support around people with those unique needs. And then always thinking about those that have succeeded in these different fields and how we can help them give back. And that may be a 55-year-old photographer that has, you know, at the top of their game in traditional photography, or maybe someone that is like 3 years older than the people in the room that has just been through something, and the kind of insights they can share into that process. So those people, the people that we've worked with to date, they're, you know, cultural leaders from across platforms, disciplines, interests, and all we're trying to do is continually find new people and channel collaboration into a few key ways. One thing to note, you'll notice the Canon shout out in that video. A big part of what Free is trying to do along the way is determine, all right, who's got the money? Brands have a shitload of money. They spend tons of it making dumb 30-second ads that none of us want to watch. And meanwhile, there's so much creativity, there's so much potential out there. So we create frameworks at Free to help companies understand why it's worthwhile to invest in the arts. We also want to start bringing this to private patrons. You know, it used to be that if you made it as a billionaire, like getting a wing in an art gallery was like the thing to do. But we want to encourage, you know, the 40-year-old millionaire to start giving back and give a more contemporary way of giving back. But also governments too, because we think that there's good business in society in investing in the arts. So our programming take both online and offline formats created in collaboration with our members. So one is stories. So that may be, if you just go to thecreatorclass.com, people submit story ideas, sharing their stories around creator culture. Some of which, and I will say a lot of this has still been kind of grounded in projects in Canada, Toronto, a little bit North America. But we're trying to build these systems so that we can work with people in Portugal and around Europe, in different places around the world. But certain stories that that make sense, that have the kind of the right appeal, we develop into video submissions and projects on the YouTube channel. The Creator Class sessions, so these are lessons in creativity and entrepreneurship, and we've been hosting them at Free Space in Toronto, and just starting to learn about learning, and determining how can Jeff should be teaching. Like, I learn every time I talk to him. So what is a way in which we can have just enough structure to get the best out of like a curriculum and an education plan, but to get lessons and learning in real time from our peers. So we host different sessions that are workshops in the studio space, and increasingly want to bring this to other markets. Exhibits, so we have ongoing exhibits that take place in the space in Toronto, but we just did one in Montreal, and this was the first time working with some collaborators in Montreal, and we're doing one in Vancouver. Yeah, I don't know why I'm like acting like. We're working with Jeff on one in Vancouver. So again, creating a framework where there's a certain kind of consistency in a creator class exhibit, but it's always as like a framework to support, the people that we collaborate with, kind of bringing their energy, their vibe, their aesthetic into that framework. And to come next year, and I bring this up because it's so pertinent to why we're here right now, is experiences. So we want to be producing, the whole thing is when we go together somewhere, when we go somewhere together, you learn so much. Like, I've been writing notes like constantly while I've been here. At lunch, I was like, excuse me, I need a minute and a half to like digest what you just said. And the notion of like, whether it's travel, just this idea of transformative experiences being so important to us connecting and learning. So what we're trying to do with these different types of programming frameworks is first discover people, discover ideas, and connect that to our team. Develop those ideas, whether it's even as simple as some feedback on a photo essay submission, so that it has a certain kind of consistency with the rest of the channel. In the video side, our team will kind of like bring the creators in and help them workshop their idea to kind of like develop that video submission. Support, and so that can be in the form of like our team support, the resources within the space, access to our gear. Our community can kind of like book gear and get access to the tools that they need. Then we produce the project. We share it across our channels. We have great partners in the likes of Booooooom, like-minded, kind of like friends of the internet, to help get the message out around the projects that we share. And then with that, it becomes this like big bat signal that as people come to discover the creator class and pull on the thread, then hopefully they come and they share more ideas, so we get this kind of like positive feedback loop around the projects that we develop. So fundamentally what we're intending to do as we do all of these different things is start to solidify a pathway to develop the creator in all of us. To go back to, me as a 20-year-old trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do with my life? Now that there's so much potential out there, but how do we connect the dots of the people that we meet, the resources that we need, the lessons we need to learn, all of those types of things to create a really clear pathway towards actualizing your creative life. And I think, to go back to the beginning, like I said, at that point, if you can figure all of that shit out, then you can truly be free, because you can find the right outlet for your creative voice, the right entrepreneurial ethic to support it, and you can just do what you love to do for a living. So I'm going to be hosting a couple workshops over the course of the week. I'm really looking forward more than anything else to like learning from you guys and to chatting more about this. Yeah, let's clap. Thank you. Thank you. Are there any questions? For Jeff and I, like we can chat this stuff through too.
Tough crowd.
How do you engage brands not to make 30-second shitty ads that nobody wants to see?
Right. So there's a lot. How do I say this? It starts. You know what? I think the big thing is like so. The initial thing that we think about when we think about companies is that they are like these large abstract corporate entities. But the reality is that there's CEOs, CMOs, directors of marketing. There's like human beings that work there. and they have objectives that they need to meet, and they have fear involved. So in the same way that we as creatives, like how fear can be stifling, and sometimes we just don't know any better way, it really starts with the psychology of the individuals involved that are the stakeholders in an organization, and building trusting relationships with those people. Before anything else, before we get into the science of the matter, is that once they start to see what it's like to actually empower people, and thanks to social media, when they look at the comments, one of the proudest things, the proudest elements that I feel about the creator class is reading the comments of anything that we've ever put out there. Once the marketing director from Canon sees not only people saying like, that is so brilliant, I want to make something like that, but then someone being like, what lens did you use? Or is that the C300? And so one half of it is like really engaging them in the inspiring side of empowering creator culture. The other half of it is utilizing the content marketing tactics of the social web to help them understand one 30-second piece of creative run 1,000,000 times thereover is not interesting, and that we can actually, through 12 different pieces of video content, help someone love you, consider you, and so we'll produce some episodes that are really inspiring and others that are really informative towards the gear. And fundamentally, it's a content marketing funnel that we're helping them deliver upon. But in the process, we're guiding them towards helping creatives produce things that they love to make. So this is not like art for art's sake. It's not a donation. It's really, we believe better business for brands to invest in culture.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I want to ask Jeff a question if people don't have questions. It's not allowed? I'm breaking the rules. Jeff, what's going to happen after Instagram?
I don't know. I think, I think a lot of people are already starting to just reject a lot of things, but obviously they're not going to not do anything. I don't know. I'd be interested to actually hear how many people are still using Instagram as maybe a show of hands of people that still feel very active using Instagram. Is there people that are still actively using it in this room? There's got to be a lot of, yeah. Do you feel, with the same show of hands, that it's as interesting as it was a couple years ago? Is there any change? That was a confusing way to ask you to respond to that. I don't know what I expected there, Sorry? Food, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think something interesting, I think, with Snapchat is because a lot of people are like, oh, Snapchat's the new Instagram, and for whatever reason, I could never get into it. But what I've already seen happening is a lot of people are abandoning that as well, and it seemed similar to me when Blu-ray came out. Blu-ray was supposed to be there was a crazy debate about HD, DVD, and Blu-ray, and this successors to DVD, and it almost didn't matter because they got leapfrogged and it went straight to streaming. And I feel in a way, Instagram and Snapchat and all these things are gonna be jumped over into this other thing. I don't know what it is, but I don't think Snapchat's in any way the thing that destroys Instagram at all. I'm not sure what that thing is yet, but to me it feels the same as when Blu-ray never really ever became anything. It's people started using Netflix, and I maybe have one Blu-ray disc in my house from a PlayStation video game or something. So yeah, it's a very bad answer because I don't really know what it would be, but I do feel in some ways you could argue that we're almost in the least creative time period, because in terms of I look at a Nintendo, the first one, or Super Nintendo, how much they got out of that one device, or even PlayStation 1, they would take full advantage of every possible thing that processor could do. And I feel I have an iPhone 5S, which is like people like scoff at it. If I pull it out, it's like cracked. It's like I've dropped it and it's smashed. And it's actually something very freeing about having a cracked cell phone because I no longer have to worry about cracking it, so I can just throw it wherever. And I actually was debating about buying a new phone and then cracking it right away. So I had this ability to just use it without worrying about keeping it precious. But I don't know. It's just interesting that I'll be throwing this phone away maybe if the new iPhone is good. But really, there's so many things that I could do with it that I won't do. And I don't know if that's ever going to change, actually. But yeah, it just seems to me that there's a lot of like excitement about VR and AR and all these things. But there's so many cool things that involve none of those things that haven't really been explored yet. And yeah, in some ways, I feel like I'm not jumping right into all these like future technologies or future apps, and I'd rather just like come hang out at a conference and like be old school and like talk to people and have beers out with people or do whatever, because I feel like regardless what happens with like how you share on social media or like what Facebook prevents you from, like they force you to pay to boost your posts or whatever, it's like that has no effect on like how I can talk to you at a bar today or whatever, or like right in the lobby now. So I feel like it's almost a good thing that Facebook is really this evil empire that has bought Instagram and is ruining it. It's like there's just going to be more festivals and things where like it further underscores how much better it is to like come to an actual place.
That was a loaded question. And I feel the same way. I think that Instagram is going to be like Trump.